We get to end talking to amazing people.
I
And this
love
time
Mondays.
we get to go to the great state of Hawaii. I don't know that we've had a whole group from Hawaii, but we are blessed to be here with the Papaola Lōkahi team.
Yeah.
And let's see, where are we at? I got to tell everybody where we're at. We're at Koviki Talk, where
Yes.
Pacific Islanders talk to Pacific Islanders about all things COVID 19. So when it was time to register for the census, we talked about how to do that safely in the middle of a pandemic. When it was time to vote, we talked about how to get to the polls and how to do vote by mail and how to do all the voting things that we do and how to do them safely in a pandemic. Now it's all about the vaccine, and we are talking about vaccine hesitancy. We're talking about our own culture and our own people, and we're doing it with Pacific Islanders as the speakers and as the guests. So I'm going to turn it over to our guests from Hawaii. I'll turn it over to Kim to start our introductions from our team from the 808.
Aloha. Thank you so much, Carl. Aloha, Naki. Aloha to you both. I'm Kim Ku'ule Bernie with Papaola Lōkahi. I'm the communications officer. That's all I'm going to say. We're going to want to then turn to Sarah and Tertia and Napua, because that's how I see them on my screen right here. And then we would like to share this afternoon, we'd like to share a little bit about how we have responded, how Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders have partnered to respond to COVID-19 in Hawaii. So first, my colleagues.
Hi, my name's Sarah Kamakuivo'ole. I'm the Policy and Compliance Coordinator for Papaola Lōkahi. Thanks so much for having us, Carl and Naki, for Koviki Talk.
Aloha mai kaho. My name is Tertia Ku. I am the Research and Data Coordinator for IMI Hawaii, which is the Research and Data Hale of Papaola Lōkahi. Mahalo to Naki and to Carl and to our wonderful producer. Aloha.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Napua Casson Fisher, and I'm the Education and Training Coordinator at Papaola Lōkahi. And hello everyone for joining us.
All right. You ready for the presentation, Carl and Naki?
Yeah.
I think we are. That'd be a good way to kick us off.
Okay, mahalo nui. Well, first off, I should start out by pointing out, let's make sure that, let me know when the screen is shared. There we go, I think it is. We're happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. We've been watching your programs when we can. Of course, it comes on at 2 p.m. in the afternoon here, so we're usually still working. You know, I have it on my calendar every week, but we're still working and in the middle of meetings, so I don't always get to see them, but I really appreciate this long-standing program. Papaola Lōkahi is the Native Hawaiian Health Board. We are authorized by the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Improvement Act, which was passed by Congress in 1988. There are three entities that are created by the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Act. And the purpose is to raise the health status of Native Hawaiians. As I mentioned earlier, originally passed in 88, reauthorized in 1992, and reauthorized again in 2010. At this point in time, up in Washington, D.C., we're discussing whether or not permanent authorization is something that is to our benefit. Three entities that are created in addition to Papaola Lōkahi. We have the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Systems. Those cover 7 islands. They provide direct primary mental health and dental health services or referrals. In addition, they provide outreach and enabling services. And we're very proud of the work that the 5 Native Hawaiian healthcare systems provide. Oh, and the Native Hawaiian Health Scholarship Program, that was modeled after the National Health Service Corps. It started a couple of years later. To date, we have been able to fund more than 300 scholarships to Native Hawaiians across 20 different health professions. And the best part about this, I think, is that there's a service obligation attached to the scholarship program. And so although the students can go anywhere across the United States. They can participate in an accredited program. The scholarship program brings them right back home afterwards because there's a service obligation that requires them to work in an underserved area in the Hawaiian Islands somewhere, and we've got priorities and processes that involve that, and that's how we bring them home. So this program is really about training Hawaiians to serve Hawaiians. But today we're actually here to talk about what we've done for the last year and a half to respond to COVID. Back in, I know this says May, but actually back in March, we were already talking with our Hawaiian serving partners, with our Pacific Islander serving partners about what's the data, what's the situation, how are we being impacted by COVID, what's happening. And it really wasn't until data came from your state and California and Texas and Arkansas and other places that finally our Department of Health in Hawaii said, oh, okay, maybe we should be taking a look at how it breaks out for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders as well. And in short time, we organized among right now 60 different organizations. We worked very closely with the Department of Health and with all of the social service and providing agencies, and we've got the name is there, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Hawaii COVID-19 Get Ready Response, Recovery, and Resiliency Team, but we affectionately call it the 3R team. It's shorter, and you guys know what we're talking about. So the 3R team formally came together in May of last year. We formed a lot of different committees. Before I go to the next slide, I really want to break out the purpose. I know it looks very generic, but each phrase here has meaning. First of all, you folks on the continent had already formed the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander response team. We formed in alignment with you folks. Our leadership attends meetings of the national NHPI team. So we are right in step with you folks. Number one, we exist to improve the collection and reporting of accurate data. Disaggregated data, we all know how important that is. We formed to identify and lend support to initiatives across the Hawaiian Islands working to address COVID-19. This comes from a quote that I heard Dr. Ray Samoa say over and over and over again. We're here to support local initiatives. We're not here to create our own work. We're here to support local initiatives. And that's how we started as well, not to compete with our partner organizations or allies or anybody else, simply to suss out, do an environmental scan, find out what's being done, identify what's not being done, and to seek out partnerships to see how we can fill in those gaps. And finally, unify to establish a presence in the decision-making processes at all levels. So that last phrase, seat at the table. Very important for our leadership. We wanted a seat at the table. To this, we started with a little over 20 partners. At this point in time, we have more than 60 partners that are part of the team and that participate in a regular basis on our different committees. We have a set of core values that everybody has come to agree on. That are reviewed oftentimes in our different committees. And here's how the committees are made up. We have co-leadership, so there's no one boss. We have two Hawaiians, Dr. Sherry Daniels, who's the executive director of Papaola Lōkahi, and Dr. Keawe Kaholokula, who's with the Department of Native Hawaiian Health at the local medical school here. Josie Howard is the executive director of We Are Oceania, which works primarily with Kofa communities here in Hawaii, and Felea Itau is a co-founder of Pacifica for Empowerment and Advancement, and that's made up primarily of Samoans, Tongans, and other Polynesians here in Hawaii. So we've got this co-leadership model. We have more than 60 organizations that I've pointed out already. We have some general steering committees that meet about monthly, but the working committees are really where the work of the team has taken place. And since last year, throughout all of 2020, these committees met weekly. And some of our leadership also participates in the national meetings of the NHPI National COVID Response Group. There we go. Throughout 2020, they met weekly. After the holidays, things shifted a little bit. Everybody started to pivot. Communications meets every other week. Policy meets every other week. Social support and recovery. Once vaccination started, testing, contact tracing, and isolation then adopted vaccinations. That continues to meet weekly. Social supports, programs, and recovery also meets weekly. So we've had a chance to pivot. The whole thing, as I mentioned earlier, started with data. So I'm just going to point out 2 slides here, and then I'm going to turn it over to our data and research coordinator here. So this goes back to the very beginning. Hawaii was doing pretty darn good over here. We had our spike in August and September of last year. We tempered it a little bit. Had another spike after the holidays. And then with the implementation of the vaccinations, we started to bring our numbers down, something that we were really proud of, but still we at the team felt like we could do a little bit better. And then the last 10 days, we've been in the triple digits again. And so we have a lot of work ahead of us. So these numbers are of July 23rd, Friday. These numbers are by race, broken out by race or ethnicity, if you will. So you'll notice that we all started kind of flat in the very beginning. Pacific Islanders had some of the highest numbers here. Where are we? Pacific Islanders are green. They had some of the highest numbers. And in fact, at some point, they were over 50% of all the COVID cases were Pacific Islanders. So there was a lot of emphasis on reaching out, working on the ground, at the ground level in Pacific Island communities. They're kind of plateaued at this point, but since some of the data has been disaggregated, we've noticed that Filipino numbers are right up with Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. And since on May 24th, Native Hawaiian numbers of COVID cases surpassed those of Pacific Islanders, and they surpassed them by 25. Now the number is almost 600. So the Hawaiian numbers are going up and up and up and up at rates greater than any other group. At this point, Native Hawaiians represent 21% of all COVID cases since last year. Filipinos are 20%. Pacific Islanders, 19%. So it's still not parity because, you know, Pacific Islanders represent 4% of the total population, and yet their numbers are 19. So 19 is not really an extraordinary number, but the point of bringing that up is that they're really plateauing. But these are what the numbers look like in Hawaii as of last week. And I will turn it over. Race data is collected reported every Wednesday, and I'll turn it over to my colleague Tersha Koo, who staffs the data and research.
Kim, for giving us a really good background in the current data that is available to the public. Kim is sharing the Department of Health DocD website, which actually provides an extraordinary look into how the numbers, both the COVID cases as well as vaccinations, are shared with the community. Every week, once a week, they release the race data. And since we, as the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander 3R team, are interested in Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, Kim does a fabulous job of getting this information out to the public. As she shared with you, the Native Hawaiian population currently has the greatest number of COVID cases. Pacific Islanders used to be the community that had the greater number, but they are sort of evening out, leveling off, or decreasing slowly. And the way that the Department of Health likes to characterize the Native Hawaiian numbers is that they're not decreasing as slowly. Rather than saying that we are increasing, they prefer to utilize the not increasing as rapidly. The first meeting of the Data and Research Committee was actually June 5th, Friday, June 5th, 2020. And at that meeting, we were really privileged to have people from multiple Native Hawaiian serving organizations, from the University of Hawaii, from the Department of Native Hawaiian Health, and from the Department of Health from the state of Hawaii. What was very interesting is the state of Hawaii, the Department of Health, really utilized much of the time during that meeting in reaching out to us and saying, we need your help. And really it was about how are we going to share the information and data that we have in order to making it meaningful here in Hawaii. They basically had been using an algorithm that they had published from 2005 that said anybody with a mixed race that also included Native Hawaiians was counted as a Native Hawaiian, which is why in our state numbers, Native Hawaiians are considered 21% of the population here. Whereas at the national level, the census only looks at Native Hawaiians in Hawaii as being 10%. Why? Because the census really looks at Native Hawaiians alone, or those who really just identify as Native Hawaiians. Whereas the State Department of Health uses mixed race data. Whenever they see Native Hawaiians, they pull out that person and put them in the Native Hawaiian bucket. If they're not Native Hawaiian, then they look for other races other than white. White is the only category that really is a standalone. If it's white combined with any other race, the other race trumps, and that person will go in the other race. I think that's really important to share with you because knowing that that's how our State Department of Health quantifies our race data is interesting, because our state is the only one that disaggregates Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, which is why we can share these specific community numbers with you. We know that being invisible or not being counted really accounts for being hidden or invisible to what our disparities are in these communities. Next slide, please. I did want to share with you that one of the first things that this committee did, besides coming together and really providing the Department of Health with kind of a focus group, provide them with feedback as to how they move forward in sharing the data, was we all wanted to contribute to how we envision data collection forms. So the committee really recommended a long form and a short form. Specifically, the intent was to, in looking at COVID-19, we looked at the long form as including all of the Pacific Islander communities. The short form also abbreviated those communities, abbreviated the Asian communities, and some others. What was important was the second question on these forms, which is, which race do you primarily see yourself as? This allowed the person filling out the form to really voluntarily say, I may be mixed race, but this is the one I identify with the most. The other question that was really of great importance to us was language. We know that many of our Pacific Islander communities, English is not necessarily their first language, but what is it? So asking people what language they would like to receive their health information in was very useful. We have worked really hard at creating these forms and have been contacted by other states as well as other organizations in helping people to establish a standardized forms for their states as well as for their organizations. I wanted to share with you that our some of our achievements, which are included in this slide, I wanted to say we have an abstract accepted for presentation in the 2021 APHA conference in Denver, Colorado. The name of the abstract is Hidden No More, Disaggregating Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Data is a Public Health Imperative. Another manuscript accepted for publication in the Journal of Health and Social Welfare entitled Addressing Native Hawaiians Pacific Islander Data Deficiencies Through a Community-Based Collaborative Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic. In March, the Department of Health, along with the 3R team, the University of Hawaii, released a special report entitled Hawaii's Addressing Health Equity in Diverse Populations. A manuscript titled The Value of Disaggregating Race Data, COVID-19 Vaccination Coverage Among Pacific Islanders, Filipinos, and Other Racial Ethnic Subgroups in Hawaii is being submitted for the Asian Pacific Journal of Health. All of these publications and abstracts and presentations have been as a result of the Data and Research Committee. Then I believe the slide we were just on gives you an idea of what's been presented and what's going forward. So I thank you for the opportunity to share, and I will pass it on to, I believe, Napua. Thank you, Napua.
Hello, Tricia. One of the committees that was created is a Testing, Tracing, Isolation Committee. That's what we were called at the very beginning of the pandemic before the vaccination was rolled out. And our purpose was to focus on the needs and concerns of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders regarding testing, tracing, isolation. And we have a mixture of professionals and community members involved in this committee. We have medical doctors from different community health centers or Native Hawaiian healthcare systems, community health workers from all over Hawaii, and also now that we are including vaccinations, we have the major vaccination organizations. We have, Kaiser, Department of Health, Queens, all at the table, which is a very unique and great opportunity for everybody to communicate. And some of our ongoing work is to support the Department of Health in the hiring process for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander contact tracers. And there was a little rest period a few months ago between the big clusters at the beginning of the pandemic, and now we're having newer clusters. And they are focusing on hiring Hawaiian-speaking contact tracers and Pacific Islander contact tracers who speak several different languages. And they have shared that having fluent speakers be able to support community during the time that they're in isolation has been a really important service to offer our community. And we also collaborate, as I said, with health systems and organizations to support our CHW trainings and continue to help continue their education opportunities, because services are created throughout the pandemic, and so there are trainings on the internet, how to help the community access the internet credit, and how to connect community with food drives or at testing sites, and so that is what our testing, tracing, isolation, and vaccination committee has been doing. And we are the one, I think, only committee that continues to meet once a week because of what we focus on in our conversations.
We have a question from the chat from Miss Sherry Daniels, and her question is, what makes this model different from other COVID responses? And I'll throw that out to the group, because there's a lot of people, and whoever is confident in the answer, go ahead and jump in.
Well, we've got a slide that later on that mentions this, but I think what makes it unique is the shared leadership. And, as I've mentioned, Sherry is actually part of that leadership, but she's not the leader. There's a true shared co-leadership. Every decision, every policy, every pivot is run by the leadership, by all four co-leads, and they kind of decide the direction. The work takes place in the committees. I think what else is unique about this model is, well, I've mentioned this before, and it's a lot like collective impact. But the thing is, we didn't initiate this team and say, hey, let's do collective impact. Tell you what, we'll be the backbone organization and we'll set up these shared agreements. We actually went through all of the steps just with an understanding that it was appropriate for our communities, that we were doing things in a Pono way. We developed shared core values. Each group developed its own purposes and missions across all teams. All of them did environmental scans of what's going on. All of them identified the gaps. All of them worked on developing partnerships. And then some of the work that we've been doing since has arisen out of that. But I think the model is really shared. And then afterwards we thought, well, how are we going to evaluate this? And we realized, hey, this actually might fit into the collective model. And I think it does, but I think we're also looking to see if there are any indigenous models out there that it might fit into as well. So I think that's some of the unique characteristics about how this team has worked. Anybody else?
I thank you very much, Kim. I was going to say, to answer Sherry's question, is that I don't know really any other response team, whether it be on the continent or not, that actually has the partnerships that we've managed to bring together, both public and private. When I think about working hand in hand with the Department of Health, in that we have really not only influenced how they share information, but they have come to us specifically for guidance on various issues, including uh, expanding their contact tracing crew to include Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians, to release uh, information that is in the various Pacific Islander languages, to bring together the leaders, the faith leaders of those communities in order to address some of the concerns of those communities because they are a spiritual people. I don't know of anybody, of anyone else that is doing the work that we're doing. I'm very proud of what has been created. Don't take any credit for it because it's not ours to take. It's really the community at large and all of the partners that have come to the table and recognize that only together can we do this kind of work. It's kind of community-based, grassroots, as well as those at the higher leadership levels. So it's been quite humbling, I think, as us as POL kakos for all of these committees to be in the presence of these people and seeing the wheels turn and the actions happening. So thank you.
Hello, this is Sarah. One of the other working committees is the policy committee, which I'm really grateful to staff. There's a committee purpose statement, as well as kind of a summary on this slide about the work in 2020. I think it's been a really great thing to see in regard to all the representation and coalition-based work that the working committees provide the space for. And in 2020, there were just so many, I think, generative conversations that people were really pleased to come to, or maybe even excited to come to, that often don't, I don't want to say don't have a space, but often don't have a space that is so forward in that it is for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander concerns, and that majority, if not every person in the room is actually Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and even if they are not, they are representing organizations that serve Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. So I think that is a somewhat unique thing that that the team provides that people really look forward to, and maybe is something, you know, why people continue to do this work in this arena. And maybe the next slide, I think, if can. And some of that has manifested in written testimony from different participants who joined the policy committee. And some of these pieces are comments. So comments or testimonies to things like the Board of Education, different groups of leaders, including the governor as well as the state legislature, and not to mention some of the county councils. And a variety of guests have come to speak at the policy committee to share their topic expertise. So we've been lucky to have many network connections to the people who come and participate, to come from places like the ACLU and different state and county offices to share about specific sub areas within COVID response that the committee has then tried to respond to or support or make comments on as is appropriate given the specific lens of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders in Hawaii, which is a voice that often doesn't have a seat at the table. I think, like some of the prior discussion has mentioned, and in all of that, I think that there has really been a lot of grounding in culture. A lot of, I would say, our committee opens in Pule not just as kind of a formality, but as an acknowledgement of tradition and practice. This is, this is not something that we think of as in culture from hundreds of years ago. This is our culture, our cultures shared, which have a lot of parallels and are alive today. And how do we create the spaces by ourselves, for ourselves, that welcome the unique voices and different opinions of the peoples who we serve, who we are, and who we represent. So it's been a great learning experience for me, and it's been, I think, a space that people appreciate in having, and we're really fortunate that many partners still come. It's been over a year at this point, and people still come and reconvene to have these discussions and talk about what's important to our communities and our people, and identify what policy-based actions we can support or uplift or alert others about to continue forwarding the work. That's it.
Okay, and for social support, that's the second committee that I helped to facilitate. And originally, social support and recovery were two separate committees, but at the beginning of the pandemic, it just seemed like there was a lot of overlap in discussion, and it was a little bit difficult to foresee what kind of priorities we needed to focus on for recovery when we were so far out and things were so new. And so we combined forces into social support and recovery. And this was the model that we created, but more so later in the pandemic, in the following slide, we put together, oh, what happened to the slide that has the priorities? I swear I've seen it earlier. Anyway, so we had identified 5 priorities for this committee, and it includes housing, mental health, there it is, health and healthcare, mental health, housing insecurity, financial insecurity, and education. And all of our conversations fell into these buckets throughout the year, and some took higher priority than others, such as crisis support for mental health, suicide prevention, domestic violence was a really huge issue in our communities, as well as housing insecurity. Right now, we're going to be focusing on this particular priority in the coming weeks because our eviction moratorium is going to expire in the beginning of August, and most of our NHPI community is going to be affected with that. And we most recently had an education think tank that included Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander educators to discuss how to support our Pacific Islander committee members in their creation of a Pacific Islander pipeline to higher education. And so how can Native Hawaiians assist in that process, and how we can together get that going. And we also continually do environmental scans for services and programs to help in these areas. Yep, mahalo.
Kamai, we're going to go back just a little bit. Sorry. Oops. Let's see. All right. Yeah, so communications, like you folks, Naki and Carl, you guys have been involved in the communications. So in the very beginning, when we did our environmental scan, took a look at what was needed, the earliest set of recommendations were really simple, that we need some PSAs both on radio and television, that they needed to invoke cultural and historic messages. And in particular, we needed in-language outreach for our Pacific Island communities. So we created stuff ourselves. We borrowed from other folks. The toolkit that LA County developed was really amazing, and we joined the rest of the country that used their graphics as well. So these were the early days. And then, as a result, I talked earlier, as a result of all the data that was coming out of other places related to Pacific Islanders or Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, a lot of news stories here in Hawaii were being generated. We were resource people. We were instigating some of these news stories. We were participating in many ways. We issued several media releases related to the data and some of the earliest actions that we were taking. Weekly bulletins have gone out since July. For a large period of time, they went out twice a week. Right now, we're trying to reconcile with the Department of Health's shift in reporting race data every Wednesday. So we're trying to figure out what the best days to send out our weekly bulletin that are timely. But right now they're weekly for sure, and we may go back to twice a week. And we have a website that you'll see on most of these slides here, nhpicovidhawaii.net. Like you, we've done tons of webinars. You can see that we've rebranded a little bit here. So we had Ask a Kauka. We featured Hawaiian physicians, or here Dr. Wilfred Alik is Marshallese. We co-produced webinars with some of our Native Hawaiian healthcare systems. We promoted the Koviki talk and especially your earliest sessions, because we weren't quite doing that yet. We didn't address the medical concerns, but we talked to our kupuna, our elders, who would do presentations on spirituality, prayer, during times of crisis. We did historical presentations of all the epidemics that Hawaii sustained or experienced, particularly during the 19th century. So we just did tons of these webinars, as I know you did. We had different campaigns. We had about 5 different concerts so far. This is the biggest one right here on November 21st. No audience, but there were more than 80,000 viewers of that concert. This Lahui Kanaka was a presentation of the kumu hula, or the hula teachers. And what they would do is they agreed on certain kapu, or certain restrictions for certain periods of time. And they would, because, your kumu is really, you don't question your kumu. If kumu says, eat healthfully, exercise, this is what you will do over the next anahulu, or the next 10 days or 20 days or 40 days. That's what happened. And so that kapu, or Lahui Kanaka, was implemented. We participated with the School of Public Health to do an art contest. Later, Napu'uwai, one of our Native Hawaiian healthcare systems, did an art contest. And this right here, Next Gen, it really started out being called the TikTok Challenge, featuring Hawaiian and Pacific Islander youth to do TikToks. But they quickly evolved. So they have platforms. They had accounts on 4 different platforms, and they've become Next Gen Hawaii. And they actually had a report out how social media is changing public health communication. This was done by the Next Gen youth ambassadors here, one of whom is Momi, is a staffer at Papaola Lōkahi, and she'd be here if she could, but she cannot. We participated with you folks on the Woven with Elders vaccine toolkit for our elders, for our kupuna. We started developing public service announcements. We would have weekly hashtags. The very first one we did featured a Samoan family. The elder, the mama who had passed away, was quite an advocate for appropriate funeral practices, and her family actually approached us about with their willingness to document the remote services so that we could live stream their funeral to family members around the world, really, in Samoa and other places. And we're really grateful to that family for allowing that. We've done a bunch of other PSAs as well, and I would some of them are in conjunction with our partners, our Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders serving partners. Some of them are in conjunction with different concerts that have taken place. I thought it was coming up next. I'm going to share one with you in just a moment. In January and February, we decided that perhaps with the new year and before the opening of the legislature, that we would take some time to do some reports back to the community. So each one of the committees did a report back, a real comprehensive look at the work that had been accomplished in outreach and communications, in data and research, in policy. And it wrapped up with rollout of an integrated Pacific lensed recovery plan. Did I skip a page? I think I might have. So what have we been doing in 2021? Well, like you, vaccinations, working on a recovery plan, and looking forward what policies can impact and reduce the burden of COVID-19 on our committees. So, here's the vaccine summary. We are not even at 60% yet, and we have been at 50% for almost 3 months. That's how slow the creep has been for this last 10%. And the state of Hawaii's goal is 70% before we have significant easing up of our masking and other social distancing restrictions. Here's the breakout for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders where vaccines are concerned. I don't want to put too much emphasis on these numbers because it does not, as it says here, it does not include federal pharmacy numbers, federal agency doses, and up until March, actually, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander data was not collected. So these are the numbers since that data has been collected, but it's not total. Nevertheless, it gives us a snapshot of what we could be working on. Our partnerships and communications, in addition to you folks, Department of Health, Kaiser Permanente, and the Public Goods Project. We've just entered into a partnership with Urban Institute. Hawaii Community Foundation serves our agencies in the state. And with the Health Forum, we've engaged in 3 different partnerships. I know we have some shared partners with you folks as well, with our Pacific Island allies as well. Here we go. I hope the volume works. I hope I can play this and the volume will work. Maybe Mena or Naki or Carl can tell me, is it possible to play a video or should I move on?
I think we would need to have that loaded.
Okay.
Actually.
All right, that's okay. All right, let's move on. I'll put when I have a break, I'll put the link in the chat there and move on to the recovery plan, and I'll take it back to Napua, who can tell you kind of what we're working on now.
Let's see. Oh, at the very beginning of the pandemic, the Feminist Recovery Plan was released by the Commission on the Status of Women, Hawaii Commission. And it was the first plan of its kind in Hawaii. It was adopted by Maui County. And this was kind of a foundational piece that our Social Support and Recovery Committee has been working from. We also look towards the Aina Aloha Economic Futures Plan, which was an online forum of community members, organizations, leaders, collecting their recommendations and their thoughts on different topics from tourism to education, health. And so we incorporated a lot of those recommendations into our plan and other health equity reports. We don't have a physical recovery plan for our NHPI 3R team, but our committees, like I said, I jumped to forward in our PowerPoint, but these are our 5 priorities, and we focus on them while the crisis arises. So right now we're focusing on housing and security because of the moratorium ending. And Kim, you're gonna talk about social determinants of health?
Well, I think this just helped to, this is actually a model rolled out by Dr. Koholokula in the Department of Native Hawaiian Health, and it provided a jumping off place for the recovery committee to work from, as well as they have worked on a recovery plan. So these are just basic social and cultural determinants of health, but we can move on to the next one if you like.
Yes, next one.
There.
Well, with the changing of our COVID restrictions and the ability to meet safely in person, we had our first in-person meeting with our 4 co-leads in May, and our first committee meeting in June, and just recently finished our in-person meeting with the co-leads and the chairs of the committees together. And it was an opportunity for everyone to discuss each of the committees, the priorities of each, and plan for the upcoming year for recovery. And so this is some listed priorities for each of our committees. What else, Kim? Okay, collective impact. Who wants to speak about collective impact?
I think we already talked about it a little bit. We didn't really realize how we were we knew that we were doing this in the right way, and we were doing it we hoped to be doing what we were doing in a collective way. And then later, when we were looking at evaluation, we realized that, hey, look, we have a backbone coordinating organization that is serving the collective, and that's in Papaola Lōkahi. That the NHPI 3R team has a common agenda for change, and that is to reduce the disparities among Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders that have emerged so clearly as a result of the pandemic. Shared measurement for data and results, and we've really all come together with shared data goals and results that feed into the work that the rest of us are doing. Our mutually reinforcing activities are all interconnected. Sometimes, you'll see us talking about one another's committees. It's because what we're doing is really all interdependent and interconnected. And that is as a result of open and continuous communication. So these are the 5 premises of collective impact. And we believe that we are aligned with these in our 3R team. And I think I see that we have taken a lot of time yet. So I think probably each one of us has more that we'd love to share with you. But maybe it's time for us to find out what you folks and the viewers find interesting, and see if we can answer any questions.
Yeah. Oops. I know Naki and I have a couple questions, and we'll check the chat as well. Right now, we're gonna pay some bills, and we're gonna listen to Koviki and let us see what the ripple effect is. So I'm gonna turn it over to Mena. She can play Koviki, and we'll be right back.
Everyone 12 and older is now eligible for a vaccine. Koviki then found a vaccine location for his sister. His sister sent an appointment link to her best friend, who reminded her business partner, who then, well, you get the idea. And it all started today with Koviki. Tomorrow, it can start with you. It's time to let our friends and family know that vaccines prevent nearly 100% of hospitalizations and deaths from COVID. We can do this.
Awesome. So that was brought to you in partnership with We Can Do This, a campaign run by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. For more information, please go to www.vaccine.gov. Awesome. So I wanted to real quick just make a comment about how nice it is to see so many strong women represented in an organization. It's a beautiful thing to see Pacific Islander faces, and we're women. So yes. So I wanted to ask a question because since California opened up July 15th, and so ever since then, my news feed has been everyone has run to Hawaii. Do you think that the numbers for vaccine are stable because everyone in the country is like they're on vacation? And I'm like, in the middle of a pandemic, everyone is running there. Are you not mad, but is it crazy? Because it's crazy to me that we're in the middle of a pandemic and people are running to Hawaii to suntan do you think your numbers are going up, or is that why the vaccine numbers are either held steady?
You know, I think we can do better with vaccines. If you take a look by age at at who has gone to vaccines, you know, the older generation is over 90%. People over 70 are over 90%. That to me tells me they're on it. They're getting taken care of. If you look at the cases that are increasing, the group that is actually increasing in the number of cases are more the younger people, 18 to 45, I believe, in which they're a little younger and can handle the cases, which is why our deaths haven't skyrocketed along with the number of cases. I think our vaccines are slowly growing. I thought I saw that, of course, our goal is 70% vaccinations in order to hit community immunity, right? We're approaching 60% currently as Kim shared that graphic with you, and just hoping that with more encouragement, everyone will choose to get the vaccine because we know that currently all of those who are dying are 100% unvaccinated.
Yes.
So I know that was really the topic of today's presentation, is talking about vaccines and where we are. Kim is always coming up with PSAs that can encourage our people, and I wished that we would have been able to share one of the PSAs that she was attempting to share, because it's really inspirational to see that people you admire or go to for healthcare are talking about their own personal stories and how they've moved forward in order to keep them, their families, their loved ones, and their patients and others safe. So that's all I wanted to contribute, Naki. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I had a question about so it's a different situation in Hawaii. I mean, it's the only state that's an island. So you have, you know, the possibility of having a healthcare system being overrun is much different when you don't have surrounding states to possibly rely on. Was that a difference? Did you see that you were doing different things differently in Hawaii than in the mainland, or do you feel like you addressed it differently because of the difference in the geographical challenges? And that really, and I hate doing this on a PI show because everybody's so humble that nobody talks when I throw it out to the group, but I don't really know which of the panelists I would ask of that. So I am going to actually just throw it out there and see if anybody feels like they approached it differently because of the geographical challenges.
I I think, yeah, definitely. I mean, right now, if I'm not mistaken, we have the only mask mandates and regulations publicly in the United States that remain. And the governor, I want to say, has repeated in his messaging that that is going to stay until we reach certain points in vaccination. And throughout, I think the statewide shutdown, I it was visible. It was very, you should only be leaving your home if you are an essential worker going to work or coming home, going to get groceries, which I mean, there were tailored messages about, you know, you should go to the grocery store no more often than once a week. And people, I think it really connects with culture, and not just Native Hawaiian culture or Pacific Islander culture, but local culture. That people here are still really deeply rooted into caring about each other and and doing things that maybe you don't even want to do, but doing it because it's for community safety. I mean, I think I heard of families that have, right, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 members, where really going to the grocery store once a week for them was like a level 4 logistics operation, right? And they did that as ohana, right? Like they made those choices not because it was like fun or easy, but because it was about community safety. So I think that, yes, it's true. As a healthcare system, the state is particularly vulnerable because it does not have external supports that are easily accessible. Like in very, very serious emergencies, like medevac to California has happened in the past, but those, I would say, you know, that's not something that we would be able to rely on for this pandemic. And in those vulnerabilities in our healthcare system, I think the serious strengths in the community, like those commitments to each other, become more valuable and more visible, right? I think, like you said, a lot of people are not going to talk about personal sacrifice or different choices that they made, or even sometimes I think it's to the point where people don't even really know why they're doing it, right? They're just doing it. They're doing the right thing because that's, you know, that's what's innate in them. And it kind of makes it sound really flowery, but you know, I think that is something that we're fortunate to have in order to be a really real tool in responding to the pandemic.
I think that's a really good point about the communal nature in Hawaii. You know, and people understand that they're on an island and the resources are more limited than they would be if they were, you know, landlocked by 3 surrounding states or something. I would think that, you know, the good point about Hawaii is everybody loves Hawaii and they want to go there. But right now, that's the bad thing, I would think, because everybody loves Hawaii. And like Naki said, there are people that are like, oh my gosh, did you see how cheap it is to go to, you know, like airlines are making, you know, the prices to go to Hawaii. Almost like, you know, shake your head. Like, why would we be advertising $99 to go to a state that it still has the mask mandate? Do you? And I know Naki asked that, but are there methods or are there ways to address that? Because I know that, you know, there was the, you know, the state mandate for quarantine and people they were, you know, supposed to go to quarantine, but with the I don't know. It seems like it just like a lot of people are going there, and it may just be my, you know, the circle that I'm connected with. But are there ways to address that and ways to kind of, you know, alleviate some of that, or is it just a really tough challenge to address? And how about Tertia?
Well, we've been in a shutdown for over a year. A lot of restaurants have gone out of business. A lot of people have been unemployed. Having visitors and family members from the continent and other areas, I think, has been a relief for somebody. I know for me, it kind of has. Our governor has employed a strategy to make us as safe as possible by enacting guidelines that restrict everyone coming in. Well, currently it's just changed, but it used to be you had to have a negative test, or if not, you would go directly into a 10-day quarantine. Currently, you can get an exemption if you've been vaccinated, and you have to upload your documents to the Hawaii Safe Travels website when you come in. I think those current policy help to protect our people currently here. Although, as Kim shared, this past 10 days, we've been in triple digits for the number of cases, whereas prior to that, we were under 100 in the double digits. It was looking fairly good. Our numbers were slowly going up for vaccinations. But what's quite striking is the fact that our deaths still remain fairly low. And again, those deaths have been limited to those who have been unvaccinated. So, although the numbers, you're right, the numbers are going up when it comes to visitors. I myself am a traveler, so I like to go and come and go and come. Um, Earlier, I went to the continent last year and walked into the airport, and there was no one there. When I went to TSA, there were 6 TSA agents and me. I was the only person. That was the only time they let me push through a cart. 'Cause I was the only person. But walking through an empty airport and knowing that Hawaii is the center of the visitor industry, really, I think in most of the US, it was almost scary. So as things slowly open up for us, it kind of means that restaurants are opening, people are working, people are making some money, but it's still very slow. I think we're cautiously moving forward to try to see what the new normal might be for all of us. My my hope is that we proceed cautiously and consider all of our loved ones, our colleagues, and our people especially. Thank you for asking, Carl.
Yeah, that very well said. Very well said. I did have a question for Kim, and this is actually more from a media angle or communications angle as we were talking. So, in the mainland, we really preach and talk about that it's the community based organizations that are going to reach the Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. Like, and we always say, like, they're not going to be persuaded by, I don't know, CNN to make a life decision like not going to church or not going to a funeral or things like that. They're going to take direction from the pastors or faith leaders or community-based organizations. But then I was thinking in Hawaii, like uh, the person on TV is, but maybe Pacific Islander, maybe Native Hawaiian, and they may be the ones speaking, to the community. Is it still that the community needs to hear those kind of directions and life changing directions from faith leaders and community based organizations? Is it any different in Hawaii because you have Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander people on the television saying it, or is it still really CBOs and leaders within the community that get the message home?
That is a good question. Faith leaders are very effective, particularly in more so in the Pacific Island communities, but effective for for whomever they serve for sure. But you're right, there are more Pacific faces in other places, and one of the biggest strategies that we're employing is using those social media influencers. So right now we are starting to work with Hawaiian musical artists, right, to tell their story. Some have had COVID and have a real poignant story. Others just simply want to share the message to get vaccinated. We are finishing up a real brief PSA featuring Marcus Mariota. You know, we hope that he'll appeal to all the young kids that, you know, he's a big fan. His personal foundation is about empowering youth through sports and other activities, and he's agreed to do this for the youth of Hawaii. So can't wait to put that on, and I think maybe by the end of the week we'll be able to do that. We've used the video, the PSA that I didn't get to show you, featured 9 Native Hawaiian physicians there. So again, they are experts in their field, but they also have that cultural na'au pull that they can share with their patients, their clients, those they serve. One of them has been on a weekly TV program, Ask a Doctor, for the last 29 years. So to have him in this and then to run the PSA on his station, you know, has that impact. So it's a good question, because you're thinking out, you know, the visibility of brown faces, and we probably do have that more here than across the continental US. We're also able to use that in multiple ways. In multiple ways, such as those that I've shared. The Next Gen Hawaii that I talked about earlier, which started out as a TikTok challenge, that's public health students. And there's even a couple of high school students. And we're trying to amplify their platform. You know, they've got really good messaging, really solid content. And we haven't quite figured out why they haven't gone viral. The content is so good. And we're hoping to kind of get that pushed out through Pacific Island organizations as well.
Well, that's that having not only somebody who played in the NFL or plays in the NFL and won a Heisman, but also from Hawaii. Like,
yes.
He's a local hero as well as a national hero. So that's awesome. My hero right now is our producer. She's been able to grab the video, download it on the computer. So we are going to show the PSA that you had tried to show earlier. Go ahead, Mena.
I choose to be vaccinated for the na wahine of our community,
so that I can continue to work to help my patients.
For the lahui. For my ohana and our community.
For the keiki.
I look forward to hugging people again.
I decided to get vaccinated to protect my patients and my family.
I got mine.
Please get vaccinated. Aloha.
So you can see from that final slide that it was a huge community partner effort. A lot of people are involved in producing that. We're really proud of it. We have 9 physicians. We have a member of the first graduating class, 1976, of the medical school at the John A. Burns School of Medicine. And we have a member who just graduated from medical school in this year, in May of this year. So we run the generations. You can see we've got Hawaiian Haole, Hawaiian Portuguese, Hawaiian Chinese, Hawaiian Filipino, Hawaiian Japanese. You know, we've got them all in that video. So granted, they're not community folks, and we've got other strategies where we're reaching out and bringing in community folks. But for those, actually, the data says that the best place, you know, the most reliable source of information, medical information, comes from one's own PCP. For those who have doctors for whom these are their doctors, or they see them on TV regularly, we know that they're reliable sources.
Well, I think you're on
Thanks
mute.
for showing
There
it,
you
Mena.
Minute, did you hate me?
You're good.
Minute, did you turn me off on purpose? I would say it's such a great PSA video, and that if you don't mind, we'd like to play it, onward going so we can share it. It's a great video. I appreciate all you ladies coming on this evening. We went over a little bit, and we probably have to have you back on to talk more about everything, all the great work that you amazing ladies are doing, and Papaola Lōkahi, all the work that you guys are doing. It's been we've been talking about and praising you guys for all the information, the resources, the testing, the vaccination awareness that you wonderful ladies have been doing. We want to say thank you so much. Mahalo, whakatai, everything that, thank you is not enough. All the information that you shared this evening, and that we definitely will have you back on to talk about more of the work that you are doing there. Thank you again for coming on. We appreciate your time and the space that we've shared with you. We are here every Monday from 5 p.m. to 6. And we just want to thank the Hawaii team for coming on and sharing all the information. Thank you so much for your time, ladies. We appreciate you.